What would you do if the family you'd sacrificed everything for turned their backs on you at your father's funeral? What if the blood, sweat, and mortal fear you'd endured on foreign battlefields became nothing more than a punchline for their privileged laughter? What if every luxury they flaunted, every fancy dress, every expensive dinner, every prestigious social connection was built entirely on your combat hazard pay, on the money you earned staring down enemy mortar fire, on the nights you thought you'd never make it home alive? And the worst of all, what if they had the audacity to call your honored military uniform, the symbol of your service, your courage, and your fallen brother's legacies, a cheap, tacky costume worn only for desperate attention? Today's story isn't just a tale of family betrayal. It's a raw, unflinching story of cold, calculated military justice, of karma delivered with the quiet, unyielding precision of a trained Marine officer. This is what happens when toxic, ungrateful relatives feast on a soldier's sacrifice, mock her service, and dismiss her life's work as worthless. By the end of this video, a cocky, overconfident corporate lawyer's half-billion-dollar career will crumble into irreparable dust. A spoiled, entitled socialite sister will break down in humiliating, uncontrollable tears in front of every wealthy guest she tried to impress. And a cold-hearted, status-obsessed mother will drop to her knees begging for the power and influence she spent years dismissing and degrading. Stick around until the final second. This deeply satisfying, well-deserved karma is absolutely unmissable, and every single moment of justice hits harder than you'll ever expect. The cold, wet thud of damp Ohio cemetery, dirt hitting the polished wooden casket, echoed across the quiet, fog-shrouded graveyard, each impact thick, heavy, and deafening in the dead, somber silence. Gray, heavy clouds hung low over the headstones, casting the entire burial ground in a muted, dreary gloom that matched the grief that should have united every member of my family. This was supposed to be the day of mourning, the day we set our differences aside to honor the quiet, kind man who'd raised my sister and me single-handedly after our father's early departure from our childhood home. This was the day every blood relative should have stood shoulder to shoulder in sorrow, bound by grief and shared memory. But instead of quiet tears and respectful silence, shrill, cruel, unapologetic laughter sliced through the misty air, sharp enough to cut through the thick fog of grief hanging over every weathered grave and marble headstone in the cemetery. My sister Jasmine stood exactly 10 feet in front of me, positioned deliberately to draw every eye in the crowd, draped head to toe in a flawless, custom-tailored designer black silk dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her long, manicured fingernails were painted a vicious, stark bleeding red, a jarring contrast against her pristine black attire, and her perfectly styled hair fell in sleek, polished waves over her shoulders. She stared me down with unbridled disgust, her blue eyes cold and sharp, twisting her features into a look of pure, unmasked contempt, as if my very presence at our father's funeral was an insult to her perfect, polished family image. "Could you not afford a decent black dress, Sophie?" she sneered loudly, her tone dripping with condescension, arrogance, and unearned superiority, her voice intentionally raised to carry loud and clear to every aunt, uncle, cousin, and distant relative clustered in the tight circle behind her. She tilted her head slowly, a practiced, patronizing gesture she'd perfected for her elite social circle, her gaze scraping harshly, critically, and unforgivingly over every inch of my crisp, immaculate Marine Corps dress blues. Her eyes lingered on every stitched ribbon, every polished brass button, every precise military insignia, picking apart my honored uniform as if it were a dirty, unsightly stain marring the perfect, affluent image she'd spent years building for our family. "Relax, you're not in some far-off combat zone anymore. I know you're always desperate for attention, always craving some kind of spotlight no one else is willing to give you. But this is Dad's funeral. Do not turn his final goodbye into a cheap, tacky circus for your own ego." Behind her, the entire assembled family circle snickered in quiet, cruel unison, their half-suppressed giggles buzzing through the somber air like persistent gnats. Their fake performative grief crumbled completely the second they spotted an opportunity to mock me, to cut down the family member they'd always deemed the odd one out, the unglamorous, unprofitable sibling who didn't fit their wealthy, status-driven mold. They stood grouped around the open 6-foot grave of the man who'd loved all of them equally, giggling and snickering without a single ounce of remorse, completely oblivious to the heavy, harrowing truth burning quietly and fiercely inside my chest. None of them had the slightest clue what I'd walked through, what trauma I'd carried, what loss I'd endured just hours before I stepped foot on this Ohio Ohio cemetery ground. They had no idea I'd just flown cross-country on a rushed, red-eye military flight, exhausted and raw, only hours after draping the folded American flag over the polished caskets of 2 young Marines under my direct command, 2 kids fresh out of high school, boys who'd trusted my leadership, who'd followed my orders, who'd lost their lives fighting for a country that let their sacrifice go unrecognized by people like my family. I'd chewed the inside of my cheek raw until it bled, locked away in a sweltering desert bunker overseas, fighting back crippling breakdowns over the squad members I'd failed to save, forcing myself to stay strong and hold my broken unit together through relentless enemy mortar fire, constant incoming threats, and unending, suffocating danger. I'd spilled my blood, poured out my sweat, and risked my young life countless times over 3 long years just to keep our entire family afloat, to pay our father's mounting medical bills, to give them the stable, luxurious life they now took for granted. And now, my own blood relatives treated me like worthless trailer park trash, like a sad, attention-starved failure, parading around in a cheap, fake uniform for clout. The wet cemetery dirt kept falling, thud after hollow, heavy thud, wet black mud splattering softly across the polished mahogany surface of our father's casket as the gravediggers methodically worked to lower him into his final resting place. I stood perfectly, unnervingly frozen in place, every single muscle in my body locked rigid by over a decade of rigorous military discipline, years of training to remain calm under enemy fire, to mask every emotion amid chaos, to stand unyielding in the face of terror kicked in automatically, shielding me from the wave of hurt and rage threatening to overwhelm me. My jaw did not twitch, my eyes did not water, my posture did not falter. I did not let a single crack show in my stoic, unbreakable composure, even as every single family member turned their backs on me completely, choosing cruelty and mockery over basic human decency on the day we buried our father. Jasmine did not even wait for the grave to be fully filled, for our father's body to be properly laid to rest, before spinning sharply on her expensive stiletto heels and marching away from the open grave. Her designer leather shoes crunched loudly over the loose gravel of the cemetery path, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed in the quiet air. The entire flock of selfish relatives followed her instantly, abandoning their father's final resting place without a second glance, rushing back to her gated luxury mansion to indulge in imported vintage wine, catered gourmet refreshments, and hollow small talk. They traded their fake, fleeting grief for a glamorous, high-end networking event, eager to flaunt their wealth and status to one another. They left me completely and utterly alone, stranded on the cold edge of that 6-foot grave, the only child, the only family member willing to stay behind and honor the quiet, hard-working man who'd raised every single one of them. I stood there for a long, quiet moment, letting the cold cemetery breeze brush against my uniform, letting the weight of my grief and my betrayal settle over me without breaking my stance. I slowly lifted a gloved hand to brush away a tiny speck of gray cemetery dust from the crisp red blood stripe running straight down the tailored leg of my dress uniform trousers, the stripe that symbolized the blood spilled by Marines in service of their country, a stripe I'd earned through active combat and unflinching duty. My uniform remained perfectly crisp, fully pressed, and utterly immaculate, even after my rushed cross-country military flight, even after days of sleepless nights and traumatic loss overseas. I executed a precise, sharp about face, my polished leather heels snapping loudly and crisply against the paved cemetery pavement in perfect textbook military form, the sound sharp enough to cut through the lingering mist. I turned toward the empty parking lot without a single backward glance at the family who'd abandoned me and their father in his final moments. I didn't need their fake, performative sympathy then, and I would never need their hollow, conditional respect in the years to come. The beat-up rental Ford SUV waiting for me in the empty cemetery lot reeked of stale cigarette smoke and cheap pine air freshener, a stark, jarring contrast to the sleek, luxury European cars my family drove without a single thought, cars purchased entirely with my combat earnings. I stepped slowly across the gravel, my boots quiet and steady, reaching out for the worn, rusted metal door handle of the vehicle, ready to escape the toxic cruelty of my family and the heavy grief of the funeral. But a sharp, sudden buzz pressing firmly against my ribs stopped me cold in my tracks. My cracked screen civilian phone, tucked securely in the breast pocket of my uniform, had lit up with a new text message, one I already knew would be cold, selfish, and completely devoid of care. I pulled the phone out slowly, my gloved fingers brushing the cracked glass, and stared at the glowing screen. My jaw tightening painfully with every cold, unfeeling word I read. When you get to the mansion for the wake, find a quiet corner to stand in. Ethan has important corporate partners coming over. Do not embarrass your sister in front of them. Not one single word asking if my cross-country flight had been safe or smooth. Not one single question about how I was holding up emotionally after burying 2 of my young Marines just days prior, after enduring unimaginable trauma and loss overseas. Not a single mention of the father we'd just laid to rest. No word of grief, no quiet check in to see if I was hurting. Her only concern, her only priority on the day of her husband's funeral was her perfect, carefully curated social image, her wealthy son-in-law's lucrative corporate business connections, and ensuring I stayed hidden, invisible, and out of sight, so my lowly military uniform wouldn't ruin their fancy, exclusive party. She wanted me to stand silent and forgotten in a dark corner like a stray, unwanted dog, invisible and obedient, while they feasted on catered food, drank expensive wine, and celebrated their fake, perfect lives built entirely on my blood and sacrifice. The unfairness of it all settled heavy in my chest, a cold, hard weight that pushed every last ounce of familial love I'd clung to for years out of my heart. My thumb hovered trembling over the cracked phone glass, pressing down hard enough to leave a deep, white indent in my skin, the sharp broken edge of the screen biting painfully into my flesh. For a long beat, I stared at the cold, sterile text message, processing every layer of selfishness and ingratitude it held. I locked the phone screen with a sharp click and tossed it roughly onto the dusty passenger seat of the SUV, sliding heavily into the driver's seat and slamming the car door shut behind me. The heavy metallic click sealed me inside the quiet vehicle, blocking out the cold cemetery wind and the cruel judgment of my family for just a fleeting moment of peace. I rested my forehead against the hot, cracked leather of the worn steering wheel, closing my eyes tightly, and in an instant, the gray Ohio cemetery faded completely away. I was no longer standing over my father's fresh grave. I was transported 3 years back in time, halfway across the world, trapped in a sweltering, suffocating concrete bunker in the heart of the Middle East, surrounded by war and death. I could feel the thick, oppressive heat clinging to my skin, heavy and inescapable. The air was saturated with the acrid stench of diesel fuel, stale soldier sweat, and burnt cordite from endless enemy artillery fire. Dim, flickering red tactical lights cast bloody, stretched shadows across the rough concrete bunker walls, painting the small space in an eerie, hellish glow. Mortar shells hammered the dry earth above my head in relentless, deafening bursts, violent concussions rattling my teeth in my skull and shaking fine desert dust into my burning eyes. With every impact, emergency sirens wailed endlessly in the distance, shrill and panicked, blaring constant warnings of incoming enemy fire and imminent danger. Every single second in that bunker felt like a desperate fight for survival, a battle to stay alive long enough to protect my unit and hold the line for our country. I sat perched on a hard metal ammo crate, my calloused hands covered in fine desert sand and faint battle scars, signing urgent military paperwork that would alter the entire trajectory of my life and my family's future. Without a single moment of hesitation, I transferred every single dime of my hard-earned military hazard pay directly into my mother's personal bank account. Every penny I'd earned risking my life daily, every dollar from dangerous active combat duty overseas, I did it all to cover our father's urgent, life-saving hospital bills, to keep him from dying alone in an underfunded county hospital ward, to save my family from financial ruin and collapse. I survived endless brutal bombardments. I held the front line steady when other units broke. I sacrificed my youth, my safety, my mental peace, and every penny I earned to keep my family afloat and my father alive. And in the 3 long, grueling years that followed my deployment, not a single worried phone call, not a single checking text message, no late night emails, no holiday cards, no proof that they ever wondered if I was alive or dead, injured or suffering overseas. There was zero gratitude for the blood money that paid for our father's life, saving medical care, zero appreciation for the endless sacrifices I'd made for their benefit. They took every single cent of my hard-earned combat earnings without a second thought, hoarding the money to fund their lavish, indulgent suburban lifestyle. They bought designer clothing, hosted extravagant weekly parties, purchased luxury home decor, and traveled on expensive vacations, building their fake, untouchable royal social status entirely on my blood, my my fear, and my battlefield sacrifice. Now, after all I'd given, all I'd endured, they wanted the soldier who'd funded their perfect lives to hide silently in a corner, invisible and ashamed, for daring to wear the uniform that had saved them all. The hot burning anger swelling in my chest did not boil over into reckless, emotional rage. It froze solid, sharp and calculating, cold and precise as a military blade. Every ounce of sympathy I'd held for my selfish family vanished. Every trace of mercy I'd clung to for years disappeared entirely. All that remained inside me was cold, unwavering strategy. I sat up straight in the driver's seat, my shoulders squaring automatically into rigid, disciplined military posture, my spine locked perfectly straight after decades of training. I reached into my warm military duffel bag sitting on the back seat, bypassing my useless civilian phone entirely, and pulled out a heavy, matte black encrypted military device, top-tier Pentagon Level 6 security tech, completely untraceable, impossibly powerful, capable of accessing classified government files and upending entire corporate empires with a few simple keystrokes. My thumbs flew rapidly and precisely over the waterproof keypad, my muscle memory from years of military intel work taking over completely. I sent an immediate priority encrypted order directly to my lead intelligence officer back at the base. Extract all corporate files on Ethan's law firm, pull full classified status and audit records on Department of Defense, bidding Project 132, compile everything and send to my secure terminal immediately. No delays, no exceptions. I shoved the powerful military device securely back into my duffel bag, jammed the car key forcefully into the ignition, and the SUV's rugged V8 engine roared to life in a low, guttural growl that shook the vehicle's rusted, worn frame. I slammed the truck firmly into drive, my tires spitting loose gravel across the cemetery parking lot as I peeled out at a steady, controlled pace, heading straight for Jasmine's gated, exclusive luxury community on the outskirts of town. They wanted to dismiss me as a lowly, uneducated military grunt. Fine, I would fight their petty, selfish civilian war with unrivaled military precision and tactical skill. They wanted me hidden away in the shadows, ashamed of my service. I was about to step directly into their spotlight and burn their fake, hollow empire straight to the ground, piece by piece. The second I pushed open the massive heavy oak front door of Jasmine and Ethan's $1 million mansion, a blast of frigid, overpowered central AC washed over me, instantly overpowered by the cloying, overwhelming mix of expensive Tom Ford cologne, fragrant luxury candles, and rich catered gourmet food. The fancy indoor smells completely drowned out the faint, lingering stench of cemetery dirt and funeral incense still clinging to my uniform boots and dress blues. The interior of the house was utterly unreal, a stark contrast to the quiet humility my father had lived his entire life with. Vaulted cathedral ceilings stretched high above polished hardwood floors so immaculately buffed they mirrored the glow of crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Endless arrangements of pristine white orchids lined every wall and entryway, imported floral decor paid for with my combat pay. This was not a somber, respectful funeral wake honoring a deceased father. It was a glossy, high-end country club networking event, a shallow stage for my family to flaunt their ill-gotten wealth, status, and social connections to every elite guest in attendance. Every single relative milled aimlessly around the sprawling open floor plan, dressed in tailored Italian suits and custom designer black dresses, swirling crystal-stemmed glasses of dark red vintage wine, laughing loud and careless without a single trace of grief. Their fake sorrow had vanished completely the second they stepped through the mansion doors, replaced by greed, vanity, and social ambition. A young waiter in a crisp white uniform hurried past me, catching sight of my formal dress blues, my polished brass buttons, and my rows of combat service ribbons. Out of the corner of his eye, he froze mid-step, clutching his silver catering tray tight to his chest with white-knuckled hands, and stepped hastily backward, like I carried a deadly contagious disease. To every single person in that room, my honored military uniform was ugly, low-class, embarrassing, a blemish on their perfect upscale gathering. To me, every stitch, every ribbon, every button was irrefutable proof of the sacrifice, courage, and duty they would never, ever have the bravery to make in their sheltered, privileged lives. I walked slowly and calmly across the glossy hardwood floor, heading straight for the empty bay window corner my mother had explicitly demanded I occupy, my boots clicking softly and steadily against the polished wood. I planted my feet shoulder-width apart in perfect military stance, clasping both hands firmly behind my back in textbook parade rest, my posture rigid and unyielding. unyielding. I locked my jaw tight, my sharp trained eyes scanning the entire crowded room with precise military precision, conducting a quick, silent, tactical assessment of every guest, every interaction, every source of tension in the space. I began quiet target acquisition, my gaze zeroing in instantly on Jasmine, who stood dead center of the lavish living room, holding court like a grieving, selfless saint for the room's most powerful guest. 3 high-powered corporate executives circled her closely, hanging on every single fake, performative word that fell from her lips. Utterly captivated by her manufactured sorrow and false humility, she dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a soft silk handkerchief, her voice intentionally soft, shaky, and sorrowful for her wealthy audience, lying through her perfect white teeth without an ounce of guilt. "It's been so incredibly hard these past few months," she purred, tilting her head in a practiced vulnerable pose. "I sat by Dad's hospital bed every single night for weeks, hired the most expensive private nurses out of my own personal pocket, and spared absolutely no expense on his end of life care. I did everything I possibly could for him." The high-ranking executives nodded solemnly, utterly impressed by her fake generosity and fabricated devotion, buying every single ounce of her performative grief, without a single question or doubt. Not once did she bother to mention my name. Not once did she admit the brutal truth. Every single penny of that luxury private care, every exorbitant hospital bill, every expensive medication and treatment, every ounce of the lavish lifestyle they'd enjoyed for 3 full years came directly from my hard-earned combat hazard pay. The money I'd earned hiding in a sweltering desert bunker, dodging incoming mortar fire every single day, risking my life repeatedly to keep our family afloat and our father alive. I dug my fingernails hard and sharp into the palms of my gloved hands, the faint sharp pain grounding me, keeping my simmering cold rage from boiling over into action. A long-buried memory echoed clearly in the back of my mind, the gravelly, weathered voice of Brigadier General Thomas Vance, spoken to me in the scorching burning heat of Fallujah during my deployment in the Marine Corps. "Loyalty is written in blood, unbreakable and eternal. Out in the selfish civilian world, it's written on loose, shifting sand. The first selfish gust of wind blows it all away in an instant." He'd been completely right. My family's loyalty had never once been real, never rooted in love or blood or gratitude. It had only ever been convenient, only ever transactional, only ever present when I was useful to them as their invisible, endless ATM machine, funding their empty luxury lives with my blood and courage. I'd prepared to stand silently in that corner and let their cheap, fraudulent show play out in full, patient and tactical, ready to dismantle every single one of their lies the second the perfect moment arrived for maximum impact, until the bustling crowd shifted suddenly, parting down the middle to make way for a lone man stepping out of the dim hallway. He was completely out of place in the room filled with polished wealth, designer fashion, and hollow luxury. Master Sergeant Miller, an old, weathered Gulf War veteran with decades of service under his belt, stood quiet and stoic in a faded, ill-fitting black suit that looked decades old and far too worn for the upscale event. A scuffed, well-earned Gulf War veteran's pin was fastened proudly to his lapel, the only polished, honorable thing about his modest attire. He'd served side by side with my father decades earlier, back when my dad was a young military serviceman. He was the only person in this entire opulent mansion who knew what real sacrifice felt like, who understood true battlefield fear, who'd endured real mud, real blood, and real loss for his country. Miller ignored every high-powered executive, every uniformed waiter, every wealthy, entitled guest filling the room. He ignored the laughter, the clinking wine glasses, the shallow small talk, and walked straight toward my quiet bay window corner with slow, deliberate steps. As he drew near, his sharp, experienced eyes narrowed slightly, locking not onto the shiny fabric of my uniform or my polished brass buttons, but onto the rows of carefully arranged service ribbons pinned proudly over my heart. He read my Bronze Star, my combat action ribbon, every unit citation and deployment award, like a well-loved book, his weathered face softening with quiet understanding as he recognized the bloodshed, trauma, and years of dedicated service each individual award represented. Then his gaze shot sharply upward, locking onto the Silver Eagle insignia pinned firmly to my collar, the unmistakable rank marker of a full Marine colonel. His steps halted completely in an instant, all color drained from his weathered, lined face, only to rush back in a flood of pure shock and overwhelming respect. He knew exactly what that Silver Eagle meant, exactly what rank and responsibility I held, exactly how much sacrifice and leadership it had taken to earn that position. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from me. Precise, textbook military regulation distance for addressing a superior officer. His calloused hands curled into tight, respectful fists at his sides, his elbows bending automatically as his right arm lifted in perfect, flawless textbook form. He was seconds away from saluting me, a fellow seasoned veteran honoring my official rank, my decades of dedicated military service, and the blood I'd spilled for our country. It was the highest, most sacred form of respect one soldier could ever give another, and he was fully prepared to bestow it on me in front of every single person who'd spent the entire day mocking my uniform, my service, and my life's work. But he never got the chance to complete that salute. A violent wave of sour red wine fumes and expensive floral perfume crashed harshly between us as Jasmine barreled recklessly through the narrow gap in the crowd, shoving the elderly war veteran aside like he was a worthless piece of disposable furniture. Her sharp, bony elbow slammed hard into his weathered bicep, pushing him forcefully out of my personal space without an ounce of remorse, gratitude, or basic human respect for his decades of military service, his advanced age, or his long-standing friendship with our late father. "Oh, Mr. Miller, don't pay any attention to Sophie at all," she trilled in her shrill, grating voice, the tone overly bright and fake for the watching crowd, her eyes cold, empty, and vicious when they locked onto mine. "She always loves playing silly dress up with those little toy soldier outfits of hers, thinks she's so special and important for running off to play army. I guess when you don't have a real respectable corporate career or a wealthy husband to take care of you, you've got to find some sad way to make yourself feel relevant and important to anyone." Her toxic, demeaning words hung thick and heavy in the fancy air of the mansion, choking the room with their cruelty and ingratitude. She stood confidently in a massive mansion purchased entirely with my blood money, sipping expensive wine bought with my hard-earned combat earnings, openly mocking the very military uniform that protected her safe, privileged, risk-free civilian life every single day. Miller's neck flushed dark, furious red with suppressed rage, his temples throbbing violently, his hands balling into tight, bone-white fists at his sides. I could see the burning fuse of righteous anger igniting inside him, could tell he was seconds away from exploding, from screaming the full truth of my rank, my service, and my sacrifices to every single guest in the room, from exposing exactly how wrong and how cruel my family truly was. But I didn't let him. I didn't need a loyal old veteran to fight my battles for me, to defend my honor for me. I locked eyes with him for a single, split second, delivering a sharp, silent tactical blink and a nearly imperceptible micro shake of my head. "Stand down." It was not a polite request. It was a direct, non-negotiable military order. Miller's jaw ground together so forcefully I could clearly hear his teeth click and grind under the pressure. Swallowing his burning, righteous rage like hot stinging ash, he stepped slowly, reluctantly back into a neutral, respectful stance, obeying my order without hesitation. And Jasmine, completely oblivious to the gravity of what had just happened, mistook his respectful retreat for personal victory. She flipped her sleek styled hair over her shoulder and winked smugly at her giggling group of cousins, utterly convinced she'd successfully put me in my place once and for all. Their shallow, triumphant laughter died instantly when the crowded room parted once more, clearing a wide, respectful path for Ethan, Jasmine's husband, the arrogant, high-powered corporate defense lawyer, obsessed with wealth, status, and dominating every single room he entered. He sauntered forward slowly, lazily, with a half-empty glass of expensive Pinot Noir swirling in his hand, his gold-rimmed designer glasses glinting sharply under the mansion's bright chandelier lights. His bespoke charcoal designer suit was immaculate, crisp, and completely untouched by hardship, hard work, sacrifice, or struggle of any kind. He'd never spilled a single drop of blood for anyone, never risked a single thing in his sheltered life, never sacrificed a single comfort for another person, and yet he carried himself with unearned arrogance, fully convinced he was infinitely better, smarter, and more successful than I could ever be. He stopped far too close to my personal space, invading my tactical boundary intentionally to intimidate me, the overwhelming smell of expensive hair pomade and fermented grapes filling my nostrils. He stared down his perfectly sculpted nose at my honored military uniform, a smug, ugly, condescending smirk tugging cruelly at his lip, fully ready to publicly humiliate and belittle his wife's lowly military failure sister in front of his most powerful corporate friends and business partner. "So Sophie," he boomed loudly, projecting his voice deliberately to fill the entire silent room, desperate for a captive audience to witness his planned humiliation of me. What exactly do you even do in the military day to day anyway? Drive supply trucks back and forth across bases, manage dusty, boring warehouses full of old gear, hand out blankets and boots to the real hard-working grunts who actually do the real work. A handful of privileged guests chuckled shallowly, their mocking laughter sharp, grating, and cruel. My own blood relatives circled us tightly, crossing their arms over their expensive dresses and suits, tilting their heads in judgmental amusement, hungry for the public spectacle, desperate to watch the wealthy, powerful corporate lawyer crush the poor, unremarkable soldier sister. Jasmine leaned smugly into Ethan's side, eager to add fuel to the burning fire of my humiliation with a sneer of her own. She probably spends all her time teaching new rookie recruits how to scrub toilets and polish floors. Don't ask her any hard, important questions. Ethan's, it'll totally embarrass her if she's forced to admit she's never done anything that actually matters in her sad little life. The room laughed harder, the shallow, cruel sound echoing off the mansion's high ceilings through every insulting word, every mocking laugh, every judgmental stare. My own mother sat perched regally on the expensive white leather fireplace sofa, draped in gleaming gold rings and designer jewelry, surrounded by luxury she'd never earned. She heard every single insult thrown my way, saw every mocking smile and judgmental glance directed at me, and she did absolutely nothing to defend me. Instead, she sighed loudly and dramatically, the disappointed huff of a frustrated parent dealing with a disobedient, ungrateful child, and spoke loud enough for every single guest in the room to hear her cutting judgment. Sophie, I've told you 100 times over the years, learn a lesson from your sister. Look at the beautiful, successful life she's built for herself. At your exact age, you should be settling down with a wealthy husband, working a nice, respectable corporate job, making real honest money, and buying beautiful, nice things for yourself. You're completely throwing your entire life away running around in dirty foreign dirt with uneducated, crude, low-class soldiers. Your entire military career is all for absolutely nothing. That cold, dismissive statement was the final, crushing blow. 3 years prior, I'd sat trembling and terrified in a sweltering desert bunker, relentless enemy mortar fire raining down violently above my head, signing over every single penny of my life, threatening hazard pay solely to cover our father's urgent hospital bills. I'd done it to save his life, to keep him from dying alone and abandoned in a poor county hospital ward. I'd risked everything I had, my safety, my mental health, my youth, my future, for this ungrateful family. I'd sacrificed every personal comfort and every moment of peace for their endless luxury and status. And now my own mother, the woman I'd spent years supporting and protecting, called every ounce of my blood, sweat, trauma, and life or death sacrifice completely worthless, nothing at all. The last fragile thread of mercy, forgiveness, and familial love I'd clung to for years snapped clean inside my chest. Every ounce of warmth, hurt, and emotion in my heart vanished instantly, replaced entirely by the cold, hollow, unshakable clarity I only ever felt on the battlefield right before calling in a deadly artillery strike. All emotion burned away to ash. Only cold, precise calculation remained. I slowly lifted my head, dropping the quiet, obedient, overlooked daughter mask I'd worn for my family my entire life, letting it shatter completely on the polished floor between us. I fixed Ethan with the infamous 1,000-yard stare, the empty, dead, unblinking gaze of a battle-hardened soldier who'd stared down enemy fire, who'd faced death countless times, who evaluated arrogant people exactly like him as targets on a scope, cold and unfeeling. Ethan's smug, arrogant smirk faltered instantly. A single bead of nervous sweat popped up at his temple, glinting under the bright chandelier light. His fingers tightened so violently around his wine glass that his knuckles blanched pure white under his skin. He could feel the sudden, violent shift in the room's entire atmosphere, the temperature dropping sharply, the playful mocking energy vanishing into tense, suffocating silence. He didn't fully understand what was happening, why the quiet, meek sister he'd always mocked had transformed into something cold and dangerous. But his primitive human survival instinct screamed loudly inside him. He had just provoked a trained, lethal predator. I pulled my hands slowly from behind my back, the brass cuffs on my uniform sleeves clinking softly in the silent room, stepping smoothly out of my rigid parade rest stance. The room's casual, shallow chatter died completely. The soft background jazz music faded to a distant, almost inaudible hum. I took one slow, deliberate, unyielding step forward, closing the gap between us, invading his personal space with quiet, unshakable authority. He expected me to shrink back in fear, to apologize for my attitude, to slink away away in shame like I always had for my entire life as the family scapegoat. But not today. I would never shrink for them again. In a flat, low, unwavering tone, my voice completely devoid of anger, emotion, or malice, only cold, hard truth, I finally spoke. Sometimes my job is exactly that. Sometimes my job is just keeping the wolves far enough away from people like you so you have the fundamental, unearned right to sit in this climate, controlled air-conditioned room, drink your expensive imported wine, and sit in judgment of the soldiers who protect your empty, privileged life. The entire room went ice cold. Every last laugh died on guest's lip. Every fake, mocking smile dropped instantly. My mother's mouth fell open in pure stunned shock, frozen in place on the white sofa. They'd never heard me speak with such quiet, unshakable authority, never seen the hardened, disciplined soldier hidden beneath the quiet, overlooked sister they'd always dismissed as worthless. Ethan's fragile, inflated ego crumbled completely in an instant. Humiliated and exposed in front of his most important corporate partners, he lashed out recklessly, desperate to regain his lost dominance and power, stepping forward with an ugly, furious snarl on his face. What's with your entitled attitude, little girl? You think this cheap blue fabric suit makes you some kind of national hero? I deal directly with top-tier Department of Defense brass every single day in my firm. I know how the real military world works. Those silly little colored ribbons pinned to your chest mean absolutely nothing. You're just some low-level desk jockey, a bottom feeder living off taxpayer government money, nothing more. Jasmine laughed loud and cruel, cheering him on aggressively, utterly convinced her powerful husband was successfully destroying my last shred of dignity and credibility in front of the entire room. My cousin smiled in cruel amusement. The wealthy corporate executives watched with detached entertainment, and every single guest waited eagerly for my public defeat and humiliation. But they had absolutely no idea what was unfolding right in front of them. Ethan was not winning a petty verbal fight with his wife's sister. He was actively digging his own professional grave, insulting and belittling the single person on the entire planet who held absolute, unilateral veto power over his entire career, his biggest business deal, and his $500 million defense contract bid that funded his entire lavish lifestyle. I let him finish every last bitter, arrogant, ungrateful word without interruption. I never interrupt an enemy while they're actively making a fatal, irreversible mistake, and right on perfect cue. A sharp, quiet vibration buzzed firmly in my uniform breast pocket. My encrypted Pentagon military device, confirmation received. My intelligence officer had successfully compiled and sent every single classified file, every audit record, every contract detail. Project 132, Ethan's make or break defense bid, the high-stakes deal he'd sacrificed months of work, bribes and corporate favors to land. The entire foundation of his wealth, his status, his senior partner promotion, and his prestigious reputation was fully uploaded and waiting on my secure military desk. The trap I'd set the second I left the cemetery was fully sprung. The guillotine blade was raised high and locked in place. All I had left to do was let it fall. I locked my unblinking gaze onto his panicked, overconfident face and spoke two simple, damning titles that instantly shattered the entire room's reality. Colonel Sophie Lewis, Commander of Strategic Task Force 132. Absolute, deafening silence crashed over the mansion in an instant. The jazz music cut out entirely, leaving only dead air. The entire room felt like it lost all oxygen, every guest holding their breath in stunned, horrified disbelief. My mother's porcelain tea saucer slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering shrilly and crashing against the glass coffee table at her feet, the sharp noise echoing endlessly through the quiet room. Jasmine's mocking, triumphant smile froze rigid on her face, her eyes glowing wide with pure terror and incomprehension. My cousins stumbled backward in unison, scrambling away from Ethan and me like I just pulled a deadly weapon from my uniform, desperate to distance themselves from the unfolding disaster. Ethan's face drained of every single drop of color in less than a second, turning sickly, ghostly pale, gray and lifeless like a cold corpse. His steady breath stuttered into panic, pathetic, ragged wheezes, his chest heaving in terror. His manicured hand shook so violently that dark red wine spilled over the rim of his crystal glass, dripping down the sides and splattering onto his polished leather dress shoes, glistening dark red, looking exactly like fresh, wet blood. In that split second, he understood absolutely everything. Strategic Task Force 132 was not some random, insignificant low-level military unit. It was the exact classified code name for the $500 million million Department of defense contract his law firm had begged, bribed, lobbied, and fought tooth and nail for 6 entire months to secure. It was the single deal that would make his career, fund his mansion, pay for his luxury cars, and cement his status as a top-tier corporate defense lawyer in the nation. He'd spent 5 long, public minutes mocking, belittling, insulting, and degrading the sole commanding officer, who held complete, unchallengeable veto power over his entire professional future, his entire fortune, and his entire legacy. He'd bullied and disrespected the woman who could erase every single thing he'd built with one simple signature on a military cancellation form. His knees buckled violently beneath him. He stumbled backward clumsily over the thick Persian area rug, his perfect, polished corporate composure shattering into a million irreparable pieces. He opened his mouth repeatedly to speak, to beg, to defend himself, but all that escaped his trembling lips was a broken, shaky, pathetic whisper. I didn't know. I had no idea it was you. Before any other guest could process the catastrophic chaos unfolding in front of them, my Uncle Robert, always the family's status, obsessed tech-savvy businessman, froze mid-scroll on his expensive iPad. His voice shook violently with shock and disbelief as he read the official public press release out loud for every single person in the silent room to hear. Oh my God, she was just awarded a major military decoration last month. She runs an entire classified military division. The entire crowd physically shifted backward in unison, every wealthy, status, hungry relative stepping rapidly away to create a wide, empty circle around the now disgraced Ethan and Jasmine. They abandoned the powerful, beloved power couple instantly and completely. No single guest wanted to be associated with the man who just single-handedly destroyed a $500 million government contract and humiliated the entire family name in front of every elite guest in attendance. Status and money were their only loyalty, and both had just vanished completely from the room. Jasmine, still completely clueless about the full gravity of the disaster they faced, panicked and grabbed tightly onto Ethan's suit sleeve, desperate to regain control of the crumbling situation and save her perfect social image. So what if she's some military colonel? She's still just plain old Sophie, our awkward, boring sister. Don't let her talk to you like that in our own house. Her ignorant, entitled words triggered Ethan's explosive, terrified rage. He spun violently on his wife, roaring so loudly, the mansion's walls seemed to shake with the force of his fury. Shut your mouth, Jasmine. Jasmine flinched backward hard like she'd been physically slapped across the face, her fingers flying to her mouth in shock as her wine glass slipped from her grasp. It shattered loudly across the polished hardwood floor, shards of crystal scattering everywhere, dark red wine pooling across the expensive wood. She stood frozen in place, trembling uncontrollably, her perfect, flawless socialite facade crumbling completely into ruin. She turned wide, terrified eyes toward our mother, begging for help and support, then glanced at her cousins and friends for rescue. But every single person in the room stared at her in cold, silent judgment, letting her crash and burn alone. The untouchable queen of our family had been dethroned in a matter of seconds, her perfect life shattered beyond repair. My mother stumbled unsteadily forward from the white leather sofa, her hands trembling violently, her gold rings clicking together sharply as she reached out toward me in a desperate plea. Her panic was never for me, never for the daughter she'd spent years shaming and dismissing. It was purely for the power, status, and unlimited money she'd just thrown away with her endless cruelty and arrogance. Sophie, why didn't you ever tell us? If I'd known you held this high-ranking military position. I cut her off cold and sharp, my voice flat, unyielding, and completely unforgiving. No trace of daughterly warmth left. You would have what exactly? Let me stand peacefully at Dad's funeral, without shaming me in front of the entire family. Let your country club friends see my military uniform without calling it cheap and embarrassing. I paused for a long heavy beat, letting every brutal word sink deep into her guilty, panicked heart. A family that only loves you for your wealth, power, and status is not a real family at all. It's nothing more than a cold commercial transaction, and your account with me is completely, permanently empty. My mother's knees buckled weakly, and she collapsed backward onto the white sofa, staring blankly at the shattered wine glass on the floor, her spirit broken and defeated. I shifted my cold gaze toward Jasmine, who was now pressed tightly against the dining table, shrinking into herself in pure terror, black mascara streaming down her face in ugly, streaky trails, her chest heaving with terrified, shaky gasps. I walked slowly, deliberately toward her, every heavy boot step precise and unwavering, stopping exactly 2 feet feet away to invade her crumbling personal space, forcing her to meet my eyes and face every truth she'd spent years avoiding. You built your entire fake, perfect house of cards entirely on my blood and my battlefield sacrifice, I said quietly, my voice steady and unyielding. No anger, only cold truth. You took every single penny of my hard-earned combat pay, money I earned dodging deadly mortar fire in the desert, while I fought to stay alive solely to pay Dad's medical bills and keep our family stable. Then you stole all the credit for his care, lied to everyone about your fake generosity, and mocked my uniform today, called my honored service cheap and worthless. You spend your entire life chasing social likes, empty status, and fake perfection. I spend mine chasing duty, sacrifice, and unshakable truth. I leaned in one final, quiet inch, delivering the final death blow to her inflated ego and perfect reputation. You only ever judge shallow appearances and optics. I decide who gets to keep living their safe, privileged life. Jasmine crumpled completely to the expensive Persian rug, burying her perfect face in her trembling hands, sobbing ugly, guttural, humiliating tears of pure defeat and shame. Not a single person in the room moved to comfort her. Not a single relative spoke a kind word. No one cared about her broken heart or shattered reputation. The perfect life, perfect social image, and perfect family legacy she'd spent her entire life building was gone forever, irreparable in an instant. Ethan scrambled forward on shaky legs, abandoning every last ounce of his dignity and prestigious status, pressing his manicured, trembling hands together in a desperate prayer, begging frantically for mercy. Colonel Lewis, please, this contract is my law firm's entire lifeline. If we lose this deal, I lose my career, my reputation, my fortune, everything I've ever built. You can't do this to me. I did not blink. I did not slow my steady steps. I walked straight past his desperate, broken form, stepping over his kneeling body like he was nothing more than worthless trash, scattered on the polished floor of his own mansion. A grown man who buckles and begs for mercy at the first sign of pressure, who mocks the sacrifice of soldiers protecting his life, has absolutely no business handling high-stakes military assets and government contracts. His fate was fully sealed the second he opened his mouth to mock me. My official cancellation order would hit his firm's corporate desk first thing tomorrow morning, permanently erasing his entire career, his wealth, his status, and his reputation from the elite corporate world entirely. As I turned toward the massive front door to leave, the silent crowd parted once more, and Master Sergeant Miller stepped forward into the empty center of the room. The slouched, tired, overlooked old veteran was gone completely. In his place stood a hardened, proud Gulf War veteran, his spine rigid and straight, his shoulders squared with unshakable military pride, every ounce of his hard-earned respect on full display for the entire room to witness. He planted his boot firmly on the hardwood floor with a sharp, rifle crack thud, then snapped his right hand upward in a flawless, perfect Marine Corps salute, crisp, respectful, and unconditionally honorable. Honor to welcome you home, Colonel. His deep, steady words boomed loudly across the completely silent room, drowning out Jasmine's pathetic, whimpering sobs. In a mansion packed full of my own blood relatives who'd spent the entire day mocking, shaming, belittling, and abandoning me, a stranger veteran who knew true sacrifice was the only person willing to honor my service, my rank, my loss, and my blood spilled for my country. He was my true family. My selfish, ungrateful relatives were nothing more than strangers wearing my last name, bound by blood but completely devoid of love, loyalty, or gratitude. I raised my hand slowly, precisely, perfectly, returning his sacred military salute with equal respect and discipline. 2 generations of loyal, duty-bound soldiers, bound by blood, sacrifice, and honor, standing united against a room full of empty, selfish parasites who'd never worked or sacrificed a day in their lives. I dropped my hand slowly, offering the old veteran a small, quiet smile of understanding and shared camaraderie, then wiped the faint warmth of connection from my face, letting the cold, stoic military composure settle back over me. It was time to leave this toxic place forever. I shoved the massive oak front door open hard, stepping out into the cold, clean night air, letting the fresh outdoor wind wash completely over my uniform and skin, stripping away the cloying stench of fake luxury perfume, nervous guest sweat, and toxic family lies that had clung to me all night. The heavy door slammed shut behind me with a final, echoing thud, permanently closing the chapter on years of being my family's overlooked, disrespected scapegoat. I walked steadily down the long gravel driveway, my boots crunching slow and sure against the loose stone, leaving the burning wreckage of their fake empire permanently behind me. Inside the mansion mansion, my sister sobbed uncontrollably over her destroyed social status and perfect image. My mother grieved hysterically over the lost power and influence she'd thrown away, and Ethan panicked endlessly over his irreparably shattered career and lost fortune. I felt absolutely nothing for any of them. No lingering anger, no pity, no regret, no guilt. After years of endless sacrifice and unprovoked betrayal, I was finally, truly free. I climbed back into my dusty, modest SUV, pulling out my secure military-issued phone. A new clean message from my top 8 glowed brightly on the encrypted screen. Defense contract files fully prepped and verified. Tactical committee standing by for your official cancellation order. Awaiting your command. $500 million. An entire corrupt, ungrateful corporate legacy built on my sacrifice. All of it mine to end completely with one simple signature. I typed 2 short, decisive words into the secure terminal. Copy that. I set my military cover gently on the passenger seat, starting the roaring V8 engine, the familiar, steady mechanical rumble of military-grade transport grounding me completely. The car radio crackled softly to life, a calm, steady voice cutting through the faint static, reciting words that perfectly summed up every trial, every sacrifice, every battle I'd ever fought. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I stared at the dark, towering silhouette of Jasmine's lavish mansion in my rearview mirror, a faint, cold, knowing smile tugging quietly at my lips. They'd thought they could bury me in the dark, shame me into invisibility, and use my sacrifice for their own gain forever. But they'd forgotten the most fundamental rule of warfare you never dare ignore. You cannot threaten, belittle, or break someone who already owns the night. I slammed my foot firmly on the gas pedal, and the Sophie lurched forward powerfully, my bright headlight slicing cleanly through the pitch black suburban darkness. I left my toxic family, my fake, unappreciated past, and my years of unreciprocated sacrifice floating in the dust behind me. Tomorrow, I would officially erase Ethan's corrupt, ungrateful career from existence. For every day after that, I would live solely for myself, for my loyal military service, and for the brave brothers and sisters I'd lost and fought so hard to protect overseas. The dead weight was finally gone. The chains of familial obligation and unappreciated sacrifice were fully broken. The cruelest, most lasting punishment for toxic, ungrateful people is never petty revenge. It's forcing them to watch you live the powerful, peaceful, free, successful life they could never even begin to touch, no matter how much wealth or status they fake. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you think this arrogant, ungrateful family fully deserved their brutal, well-earned karma? Would you have shown them any mercy after their endless betrayal and mockery? Drop the word freedom in the comments right now if you believe cutting off toxic family dead weight is the ultimate act of self-empowerment and self-respect. If you love this deeply satisfying military justice underdog story, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because I've got countless more unbelievable, emotional, and incredibly satisfying revenge stories coming your way that you absolutely will not want to miss.